Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I'm your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Kati Morton. I'm so glad that you're here. In today's episode, we're going to talk about a lot of different things. I'm going to discuss why we can feel overly responsible in life, whether or not dreams can traumatize us, and dealing with constant thoughts of suicide. Then I'm also going to explain why someone else's trauma can affect us, what constitutes sexual abuse, and how to overcome nostalgic depression. And if you are looking to get your questions answered, if you keep asking them and frustratingly enough, they just don't end up getting picked, I do my best to pick as many as possible. However, I also answer them over on my YouTube memberships. There are 4 live streams a month. I answer all of your questions live during those times. I also have live streams on Patreon. There are a ton of ways to get your questions answered. So those are just some other things to look into. Without further ado, let's jump into question number 1. This question says, Kati, how do we figure out what we're responsible for? Childhood experiences have left me with an overinflated sense of responsibility, or so I'm told. This hyper-responsibility is working with some other beliefs and hindering my ability to process a more recent trauma, which has left me feeling responsible for somebody's death. My therapist wants me to try to rewrite my standards of what I'm responsible for. And I really want to show that I can do this over the summer break. People pleasing at its finest, I feel that. But I just don't know where to start. I know you'll probably tell me that I should discuss it with my therapist. You should, but we'll talk about this. But I don't want her to think that I'm entirely useless. Look at that judgment. Even the idea of not taking responsibility for something makes me feel anxious and guilty, as if I'm being neglectful. Interesting. How do I know what responsibilities are mine? And how do I relinquish those which aren't mine without feeling guilty, fearful, or a failure? What a question. As a recovering people pleaser myself, I have struggled off and on with what I should be responsible for, because when I'm feeling not as resilient or exhausted, overwhelmed, things like that, I can find myself feeling responsible for other people's emotional experience, right? And so this is a great question. When it comes to responsibility, we are only responsible for ourselves. Now, that sounds really simple, right? Okay, I'm only responsible for myself. Well, then are we responsible for how we interact with other people? Yes, we are. Are we responsible for how people react to us? Absolutely not. Are we responsible for ensuring everybody else is okay? No, we're not. And so it's really important to draw that line and know that the only person we have control over, the only thing we can control is ourselves. And so back to this person's, question is, even the idea of not taking responsibility for something makes me feel anxious and guilty. It would really, really be helpful for you to understand where this urge comes from. Like you said, childhood experiences. I assume as a kid, you were made to feel responsible for other people. That can happen a lot in families with addiction, where there's any kind of trauma, neglect, or abuse that's going on. People can say things like, parents and other members of the family can say, well, if you wouldn't have done that, then they wouldn't have done, they can misplace guilt and tell you you're responsible for something that you're not. I'm here to tell you that you're only responsible for yourself and the ways that you interact with the world. That covers everything. And I know, again, it sounds really simplistic, but it maybe is helpful for you as you navigate this with your therapist. As you want to put things on the list of responsibility, think, is that myself and the ways that I interact with the world? Or is that me thinking that someone else's experience is my responsibility, or how someone else feels is my responsibility, right? And I know we can get into the nitty-gritty of things, like if we want to talk responsibility in a home, like what have you communicated with your partner or your roommate and how you divvy up those tasks? But again, in summation, we're only responsible for ourselves and the way that we interact with the world. And that really covers it. I will tell you that is tricky, because when we people please, we think, well, then I need to interact with everybody just perfectly. But we have to be honest with ourselves. It doesn't have anything to do with me and how I interact. It's with how they respond, which I have no control over, right? And so that's really that nuance that you're going to have to spend some time. I know it already hurts my brain even thinking about this question before filming and putting this answer together. But that's the truth, is we have to consider if what we're taking responsibility for is something we actually have control over. We only have control over ourselves. Okay? So just think about that. I hope that helps. Also, take note of how you talk to yourself, because when you said, I don't want her to think I'm entirely useless, that's not a very nice thing to say about you. I think you're pretty great. And we should pay attention to that and let her know that we deal with negative self-talk, which I will be honest, usually comes along with the people-pleasing stuff, but just throwing that in there, okay? Let's move on to question number 2. It says, hey, Katie, I hope you're well. I am. I hope you're well. It says, this question has got nothing to do with me. It's just something that I'm wondering. People dream horrible things, fearing for their own life and safety, as dreams feel absolutely real while you're dreaming them. And I'm just wondering, could you get traumatized by your dreams? Thank you so much for your work, and I believe you're helping so many people out there. Oh, I hope so. I'm so glad. So happy to be here. Now, there are a couple of add-ons. I think there's 2. But let's just jump into this. Now, when it comes to research, unfortunately, most of the research is about people with trauma having trauma-based dreams. And we do know through that research, the beautiful thing about it is we do know through that research that people can re-traumatize themselves because their dreams are often the equivalent of a flashback when you're awake. But you just happen to be asleep. And they know that it can make the PTSD symptoms worse. It can exacerbate already existing other symptoms, and it can make us feel overall more traumatized or doubly traumatized. Therefore, I believe we could extrapolate from that conclusion that yes, dreams could be traumatizing to us. Now, the tricky thing about it, and the reason that I'm not 100% sure, because again, I've tried to look up some research and most of it is in the reverse. Like you have trauma and then you have trauma dreams, not about dreams themselves traumatizing you. But the reason that I don't know for sure is that we know when we wake up that was a dream. Now, this could get convoluted if we struggle to parse out what was a dream and what wasn't. But if we haven't had any trauma in our real life, but we've dreamt it, then when we wake up, we're like, oh, because I've had dreams like that. I used to have this recurring dream where I was in my house that I grew up in, and there was this guy with black, curly, short hair, and he would be racing to like bust in my front door or the windows, and I would rush to lock right before he'd get in. And this wasn't a person that I knew in real life. I couldn't even tell you what his face was like. I just knew he had like short, black, curly hair. It was like kind of hanging long, almost kind of like Bob Ross's hair, but shorter. Anyways, I would race to try to lock the door, and I would get there all around the house, and there'd be one last door or window, and I'd go to lock it, and he'd get in, and I'd wake up. Now, that was scary. That guy terrified me in my dream, but I was not traumatized because when I woke up, I realized that it was a dream, and I was like, oh, thank God. And I think that piece is what might prevent this from actually causing trauma. And so those are my thoughts, right? We could extrapolate from the research and say like, well, if it can re-traumatize people, then it probably could traumatize them. Yes. But then, that realization that it's not real, because the thing that makes, I guess I'm thinking more PTSD rather than trauma. Yes, we could be traumatized because we were terrified and we, are scared for the life or safety of us or someone that we know, but we wouldn't develop into PTSD because we would know that it was a dream. We'd wake up and be like, oh, thank God, right? And so I know that that's not an exact answer, but those are my thoughts. And that's what I read. And I wish there was more research out there. Luckily, there is a lot about trauma and trauma causing nightmares and night terrors and all of that stuff. And so that can help us better understand, but that's what I know. Okay, now there were add-ons. It says, I've been dreaming about being kidnapped since I was about 8 years old and saw the police composite sketch of a blonde dude who kidnapped a child. I am 26 now and still dream of getting kidnapped by him. Does it need to have a trauma origin? Not always. Dreams often, there's a lot of thoughts about what dreams are. It's my personal belief that dreams are our brain's way of making sense of our day and our life and processing things. And so it can bring certain things back up over and over, trying to give our brain another opportunity to process it. And so because this was probably so scary to you as a kid, and parents often do this when they want their children to, don't talk to strangers and don't go running outside and talking to anybody or doing this or going with somebody's parents or anything without talking to me. We want to keep our children safe. But in doing so, sometimes parents will show kids, be like, see that guy? If you see somebody like that, you run away. Right? And it can scare children because we don't fully understand, and we can think, oh, he's going to come get me and I have to run away. This person's out there somewhere, which isn't incorrect, but you can see how our child brain can turn it into more than it really was, maybe. And so that could have been really scary for you. And your brain is still trying to make sense of this terrifying situation, this person that we're fearful of, and we don't even know who they are or where they are. And so even though it wasn't necessarily a trauma for you, or maybe it was, it's still something that your brain wants to process. And so I just encourage you to actually, this sounds kind of maybe silly, but talk it out. If you're in therapy, talk it out with your therapist. If you're not, talk about it with your friends and your family, and even maybe look it up, this story. Try to fill in the blank spaces and try to make sense of it and process it through. Because my hypothesis is that it keeps coming up and you're still dreaming about it because we've just never really talked about it at length, given ourselves a chance to process what we felt like as a kid when we were scared of this person. And I think giving yourself that opportunity will allow it to go away and to fade. Now, there was another ad on it said, I am one of those people. I have a lot of disturbing dreams every night. I wake up covered in sweat and my bed is soaking wet. I experienced sexual abuse in my childhood and I find myself in the presence of my parents or in my old home in these dreams. You're having trauma dreams. Even if the contents have nothing to do with my childhood experience, I often fear for my safety. I'm terrified. So perhaps it's in the same emotion, just like back then, but with a different storyline. I'm exhausted and overwhelmed. I don't know how to deal with these nightmares, and it's getting worse lately. And currently I struggle a lot with nightly binging and purging. Do you have any advice on how to cope with nightmares and the urge to binge and purge at night? Now, there are medications. Talk to your psychiatrist. There are medications that can help with night terrors and nightmares when they're consistent like this and we're not sleeping well. Essentially, you're getting re-traumatized in your sleep. So I would argue it's not even really restful sleep at all. And so unfortunately, that's really common. Like I said, there's tons of research if you wanted to dig into it. I read one that was conducted in Harvard, and I believe in 1992, and then they redid it in 2004, a different version. But there's a ton of them. You can, honestly, if you go through Google Scholar, the amount of research for trauma causing nightmares is huge. And that's why there's medications that can help with that. And I would really encourage you, if you're not seeing a psychiatrist, to talk to them about this, to get an appointment, because the way that we get through this, the way that we cope with nightmares, make them go away and things like that, is through the processing of the trauma. And I know that sucks, but that means through EMDR, talk therapy, somatic experiencing, whatever you have access to, that through that work, the nightmares and night terrors will lessen and slowly go away. And I believe, now there's a couple of things, but I want to address the binging and purging. I think that's your way of coping with the discomfort, with the dysregulation, right? Binging and purging or eating disorder behaviors have nothing to do with the food and everything with soothing our system. And you don't know what else to do with it. So you binge and purge to try to deal with this re-traumatization that you're experiencing. And so in order to alleviate that, we're going to have to deal with that trauma and work to talk it through, process it through, whatever we need to do, right? And then when it comes to coping with nightmares, obviously there's the medication piece and the working through the trauma. That's the big, that's the crux of it. However, there are things we can do to try to set ourselves up for success. We can have a nighttime routine where we shower and we shake out, we dunk our face in cold water. Maybe we have we make ourselves some tea or have some magnesium or L-theanine. Those are things that help you sleep. Talk to your doctor, but they're, over-the-counter things, just like vitamins. And have this process that we go through every night to prepare ourselves for sleep, because our brain and body loves routines. It loves to know what to expect. And if we can try to get to sleep or get to bed around the same time, roughly within like half hour, and we can do our process every night, do our body shakes. Doing the body shakes and the dunking our face in cold water can help calm our nervous system down before we go to bed. Is it going to make sure we don't have nightmares? No, but it could maybe give us a few free nights, or at least give us an hour of good sleep or 2 hours or whatever. And we're just going to try to get what we can out of it. So there are things we can do to kind of take the edge off before we go to bed. But the true healing answer is to process that trauma so that we don't keep reliving it. Okay? Let's move on to question number 3. This question says, "Hi, Katie. This year I have become really suicidal, and I'm struggling with it every single day. My depression is so strong right now that I can't find joy in anything. I'm so sorry. I also have this feeling like I should be able to do something to make these terrible thoughts go away, but there's nothing. My therapist isn't super helpful, so I'm wondering if you had any advice or could just talk about suicidality." Couple of pieces here. When you said your therapist isn't super helpful, I'm curious what that means, and I'm wondering if maybe we should try to find somebody else. Sometimes therapists in general can be scared to talk about suicidality because they don't want to have to hospitalize you, or maybe they don't really know what else to offer. Maybe they've already offered you a ton of things and nothing has helped. I'm not sure, but just something to think about, okay? Now, I am a huge fan of the safety plan. I have a video about it. You can just look it up on YouTube, safety plan, Kati Morton. It will come up. Check that out because that can really help us prepare for these dark times, because we need to have some different coping skills. We need to have ways to distract. We need to have people we can reach out to. We need to have a plan in place before we get back into this intense suicidal thought. Now, I know you're struggling with them every day, so it's not necessarily ideal to do this on your own. I might encourage you to create the safety plan with your therapist, because when we're already actively suicidal, we're going to really have a hard time putting it together. But if you're wondering, a suicide safety plan is important because it gives us coping skills that we can do. These are things like call a friend, go for a walk, pet a dog, even organize a closet, paint our fingernails, take a bath, anything that could be helpful. And these need to be things we can do in day or night, because nighttime tends to be the hardest. So we want to make sure there's things on there we can do at night. Then also people we can call and reach out to directly. Like I said, calling a friend or texting a friend, texting or calling your therapist. Those are all great things to put there as well. And then emergency things like 988 is great, or the crisis text line 741-741. We need to have a plan for when we feel like we don't know what to do, and then we can pull out that suicide safety plan and we can look through it and we can start going through the things and trying out the things, because we're not going to be in our right mind to think of it all. So we want it to already be written down and prepared for us. Okay. I encourage you to put that together. I have a full video about it if you're wanting, to walk through in more detail, but that's really a key piece in this. And then considering medication. Again, I don't know if you're seeing a psychiatrist or not. I know I mentioned that in the earlier question, but that could be really important here, because if the suicidal thoughts are so intense and they're happening each and every day, we're going to have to find a way to get you some relief of those symptoms, because to participate in therapy is going to be really hard. To see any reason for doing anything is going to be really hard. And I think that medication is honestly the next place that I would go. And if you're like, oh, I've been on an SSRI or I'm on medication, maybe we need to look at alternative options. There's things like ketamine infusions that are helpful for people. There's Spravato, I think it's called, which is like the nasal ketamine spray that allows you to still live your life and not have to be infusion, sitting in a doctor's office getting an infusion. There's a ton of different options out there. Let's try them. Let's get you some relief. Because looking for glimmers, I could give you all sorts of tools and techniques. Those aren't going to work right now because you're in it. And suicidality takes away any hope or any empowerment feeling. So we're not very motivated. And that's why it's going to be hard. We're going to need to see a psychiatrist. We're going to need to get something else on board to keep you safe. Until then, when we get our head above water, then we can do more of these things. But that's really my advice, okay? Another comment said, I really relate to this. Why is it so hard to do the things that I know would make me feel less shit about myself? I'm also scared that by bringing this up too many times in therapy, she might not take it seriously anymore. Oof, that would never be the case, FYI, but I'll talk about that. I also emailed my therapist a couple of times. She allows me to, when I was very suicidal and almost actually did it. She then once called me and wanted to have me admitted, but I refused. Does suicidality ever go away? Yes, it does. Or do some people just have to learn to live with it? I attempted when I was 15. Does that mean that I'm more likely to do it again since behavior predicts behavior? Great questions. It's hard to do the things because depression/suicidality robs us of our motivation, and it makes everything feel like so much work. And so that's why it's really hard. And that's why medication is there. That's why more intensive treatment options are available. I don't love hospital stays either, but if it keeps us safe, I'm all for it. You're lucky that your therapist allowed you to refuse and didn't force you in. Some people will do that because they worry for your safety. They have to keep you safe. It's part of, as therapists, we are legally bound to put you in the hospital if we think you're a danger to yourself. And I believe this is worldwide. It's not just in the States. In the States, we call it a 5150, but other countries have different numbers and names that they address to it, like being sanctioned or sectioned, I think you guys call it maybe in the UK. But admitted, this person called it. There's all sorts of different terminology. It doesn't really matter, but they can force you in to keep you safe. I don't like doing it. I don't think it's helpful really, but it could prevent an attempt. Now, okay, I talked about why it can make you feel shit about yourself. I'm glad that your therapist allows you to email in between sessions. Does suicidality ever go away? Yes, but it has to be properly treated. I don't think we can ever get over that suicidality hump without therapy and medication. And I know that sounds intense. You're like, but not everybody needs medication. I know, but often when we're this deep in suicidality, it's constant. It's bothering us every day. We can't participate in therapy. So any behavioral techniques that I give you, you're not going to be able to do. Any recommendations of things I want you to do in between sessions, never going to happen. So we need to get our head above water. And that's where medication comes in. Again, it can be any kind of medication. Talk to your doctors, talk to your psychiatrist. There's, research studies going on in Colorado, California, and I believe maybe Oregon and New York also about psilocybin. And there's things with, different strains of marijuana. They're testing stuff to try to figure this out. I think even MDMA, ketamine, like I said, they're doing all sorts of research. So there'll be other options, but talk to your doctor. Tell them what you're experiencing. Let's get your head above water so then you can do more of the stuff. Because otherwise, we're not going to be able to do it. Like you said, why is it so hard? Because you're struggling with suicidality and it sounds like depression. That's why. Okay. Now, the last little piece, you don't have to learn to live with it. We can get it to go away. But then they said, if I attempted once, does that mean that I'm going to attempt again? It puts you at a higher risk, statistically speaking. As therapists, we are taught and really in the legal and ethical components mostly about suicidality because we have to keep our patients safe. And we're kind of on the hook making sure that nothing happens to you. And so we're going to, have safety plans in place with you. We're going to have maybe say that you need to be admitted to the hospital. We're going to check in on you. We're going to have all of these things in place to make sure that you're okay. And so if we know that you've attempted before, that might be why your therapist wanted to put you in the hospital. It does mean that we are more likely to do it again, but it doesn't mean that we are. Behavior can predict behavior, but that's just statistics. That doesn't mean that every person, it's not 100%. It just increases the likelihood. So if I know one of my patients has attempted before, I'm going to be concerned that they might again. And I'm going to take precautions when it comes to things like safety plans and talking about what steps we're going to take so they know. I don't want anything to be a surprise from them. I don't want them to be surprised with what I'm going to do and check-ins and all of that good stuff. So that's kind of where we stand on that. I hope that makes sense. If you have follow-ups, always happy to talk about this subject. I know a lot of people shy away from it. We struggle with YouTube. We fight with them all the time about like things being age gated and demonetized because I talk about this, but we have to have a place to talk about it. It's important and it is vital for our lives. Okay. Let's move on to question number 4. It says, happy Thursday, Katie. Happy Thursday. It says, how do you get over trauma that isn't even yours? I wasn't the one abused, but why do I feel so bad? Recently, the church/school that I grew up in has had a series of sexual abuse cases come out. A good friend of mine being one of them. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. The school and church was always legalistic and used corporal punishment. Oh wow. But these new things are just coming out and being prosecuted. I found out my parents knew about it and blamed my friend or didn't believe her and continued to attend and keep us in the school or church for 7 more years. Oh my God. I'm so angry and upset, and it didn't even happen to me. This trauma isn't mine, and I feel like I'm overreacting. I want to help my friend and not make it about me. How can I do that when I feel so triggered? Here's the thing about trauma is that, and someone in the comments said this below this question. That's why I love our community. You guys are so helpful. We can be traumatized when we fear for our own life or safety or the life and safety of someone else that we love and care about. This was your best friend. You also attended that school and went to that church. You probably knew the abuser. This is so close to home. You probably are traumatized by this. I know it feels like it didn't happen to you directly, but we can be traumatized by watching something happen. Like if I watch a car crash, that can be traumatizing to me. If you find out that your friend was being abused and then your parents didn't even believe it, there's so much happening here. There's so much upset, trauma, overwhelm that's going on. Of course you feel you feel this way. Of course you're triggered. I encourage you to talk about this with as many people as you can. Maybe not your particular close friend because she's going through it, but talk to other people who are in a similar situation to you, feeling like, oh my God, can't believe this happened. Because having that opportunity to share in an experience, to talk it out, is really just giving your brain and another opportunity to process what you're going through. And so I cannot encourage you to do that enough. Talk about it with people who are kind of in a similar situation, who will listen and also understand. That will really, really help. And then when it comes to your friend, check in on them. You being triggered doesn't mean you can't check in on them. You can't see how they're doing. You can't offer your condolences, your support, I'm so sorry I didn't notice any of that. I know in general, when we're going through something like this, most people just want to know that people are there. You don't have to have any answers. Actually, it's preferred you don't try to fix anything. We just have to show up and just be there. Support them through it. And, if you're not in therapy, I cannot encourage you to get into therapy fast enough. Getting some support as you go through this is going to be really helpful in healing, because this is a huge chunk of your life. You essentially grew up there. Of course you feel traumatized. I know we can judge ourselves, but we're not measuring trauma versus trauma. We're saying your friend had something horrible happen to them, and that is terrible. And that's a horrible abusive trauma. And you realizing all of this and growing up there and this being your best friend also feel traumatized by the situation. And both things can occur at the same time. Okay? One doesn't have to beat out the other one. And again, I'm so sorry. That is so sad. I'm glad they're being prosecuted, and I hope they rot. Terrible, terrible people. Okay. Moving on to question number 5. This is a repost. And like I said before, feel free to ask your questions as many times as you need to. I try to get through, as many of them as possible. I even like to scroll randomly and pick one. So hopefully that gives you, I'm doing my best to get some random ones in here as well. Now, this question says, Katie, hi, Katie. As a child, I was held down and touched in inappropriate places by an older man. I was in elementary school and he was about 10 years older. Oof, I'm so sorry. I was not raped and no clothes were removed. But I wonder if this is still sexual abuse. 100% yes, without a doubt it is. Okay. I only recalled it happening once. It doesn't matter. It can happen once. It can happen 10 times. Those are all abuse, and that's all trauma. Also, would remembering that experience cause a lot of anxiety and pain behind certain annual female appointments? 100%. Going to an OBGYN as a woman or a man going to, a physical, but going to any doctor appointment that's going to invade your space like that, if you are a sexual abuse survivor, is going to be tough. And if you're able, it's really important that you tell them, because they often have different protocols. Sometimes they'll allow you to bring a support person in if that's what you want. They can tell you what they're going to do before they're doing it. Sometimes if it's necessary, they can knock you out for it. They can give you a Xanax or something to calm you down, all sorts of things. So if you can, please let them know. Okay. I know I haven't been in years because they make me so uncomfortable, these annual appointments, and it's painful. I know they're uncomfortable and potentially painful for a lot of women, so I'm not sure if I'm just being dramatic. No, it could be, is it vaginismus? What's it called? I'm forgetting off the top of my head, you guys. I'd have to do some Googling. But when we have abuse in our past, we can constrict the muscles of our vagina so intensely as a protective measure. It's almost like not letting anybody in. And it can make things incredibly painful. That's why sex can be really painful. Annual visits can be painful. Any kind of, even childbirth. A lot of my patients in the past who've had children have talked about like the checkups when they're pregnant being like horrific, and them skipping some because they're like, I can't do this again, and it gets overwhelming. So you're not overreacting. You're not making this into a bigger deal. It's essentially like a physiological response to the past assault/abuse that you sustained. Okay. I also realize I tend to downplay things that I've been through. That's a trauma response too. I feel like my emotions are all over the place, and it's a battle between the negative thoughts I believe about myself and the positive thoughts I know I should be having, but I don't believe. For background, I'm an empath who was also recently diagnosed with complex PTSD. Yes, I experienced a lot of childhood trauma. Thanks for all that you do. Of course, you're not being dramatic. What you're going through is as a result of the sexual, I assume you said childhood trauma, so there's that trauma already. Not to mention the being held down and touched inappropriately by an older man when you were younger. That's sexual abuse as well. And so that's another trauma. And that's why your female annual visits are horribly, horribly uncomfortable and painful. And again, I hope you're in therapy. I assume so because you were just diagnosed with complex PTSD. Talk to them about this as much as you feel able to and as you feel ready. But let's, let our doctors know about this if you can. You can sign a release and let your therapist call them and have them add it to, you have to sign a release on both sides, but your therapist can do that for you if you don't feel able. I've only done that for one patient, and it was actually not the OBGYN, it was the dentist that was really triggering. So I made a call to let them know of her past, and that really helped. And they knocked her out when they had to do intensive work on her mouth. And so let your therapist give a call if you don't feel able to say it, but let's let them know. It's not uncommon. I even have friends who don't have any sexual abuse in their past who struggle with them, and they let them know, and they give them some medicine up front to help them calm down, and they can bring a support person in. There's a lot of things that can be done. So let's let them know. And please talk about this in therapy and know that it can and will get better. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I'm so sorry someone took advantage of you. Fuck that person, man. Punch them in the throat. Hopefully, things caught up with them. But yeah, it does get better, and you're not being dramatic, okay? Final question number 6 says, "Hey, Katie, can you talk about nostalgic depression?" Gladly. "I already have severe depression, but this mirrors my current emotions. I know it's perceiving the past as happier than present, yes, and unhappiness with current circumstances. Yes, the thing about nostalgic depression is that because when we look back, we often don't see the full picture. We see it through kind of rose-colored glasses, at least somewhat, especially when it's in this context with nostalgic depression in particular. We look back and we don't remember any of the bad times. Often we only remember the good, or we put more emphasis on the good and kind of like overshadow the bad. And this can make our current life look even worse than it actually is because of that comparison factor. And so it's really, really common for nostalgia to be a piece of our depression and to make our depression symptoms worse. It says, "I have intense grief over losing my dad in recent years. I also cry often over people that I will never see again, death and lost friendships. I feel the same for places that I'll never see again, songs and movies from when I was little, lost homes I'll never be able to spend time in again. And most good memories cause me intense emotions such as regret, anger, and loneliness. Those memories were better than anything I'll be feeling for years. I feel like I'm constantly mourning." That is the problem right there. This belief here. Those memories were better than anything I have been feeling for years. That's what we need to challenge. We need to be honest about our past, and we also need to be honest about our present. We're seeing it in these through different lenses. It's like we look back with rose-colored glasses and are like, "Oh, that was perfect. Everything was great." And then we look in our present through these cloudy, hazy glasses, and we're like, "Oh, everything's shitty and terrible. This is terrible." And it's making our depression worse. Now, I don't know if you're on medication, but because this sounds palpable to me, it sounds like it's every day, all day, I really would encourage you to see a psychiatrist and inquire about possible medications to help you, because this sounds like it's just feeding into your depression. And like you said, you're putting an overemphasis on certain things and then downplaying the good. And that's part of our depression. And so in order to get our head above water, we're going to need some medication. Obviously, we can challenge these thoughts and these memories, by checking facts. But I worry about doing that too much because I don't want to make you feel negative about everything. At least we have the nostalgia where we think, "Oh, that was so lovely and wonderful." I want you to be able to honor those happy memories. I don't want to try to rob you of them. So maybe we just wait and see about medication, and then the therapeutic things can come next. Do you see what I mean? Because I don't want to take that away. But I could challenge you for your present thoughts. When you say I haven't been feeling this way for years and it's terrible, my life is terrible now. When you have those current present thoughts, I want you to check your facts on that. I want you to challenge it. I don't even know if that'll work if your depression's too deep, but that's a potential thing we could do right now. Because you could look back in 5 years from now on your current situation and feel like that was so much better. I do that even in my own life. I'll be like, "Oh, things are so terrible. This is bad." And I'll look back and be like, "Oh, that was amazing." But if I could actually go back in time, back to that time, I'm like, "Oh, it was so much better back then," right? We always think that the grass was greener, it was better before, and that's because we're cherry picking the memories. And so I encourage you to maybe look for a couple things, maybe just one thing a day that you're grateful for now, and see if that can shift a little, shake that loose. Now, there were some comments on this. As I have a similar issue, but it only lasted about 5 months from November until March. It's interesting timing. Sounds like seasonal depression. I recently moved from the city to the countryside, and although the school or extracurriculars that I attend have changed, I still felt sad and had to grieve for my childhood home. That's okay. It was a big transition. At first, feelings of sadness and the need to cry arose in November when I was taking the bus home. Then it started to get more frequent. It took much longer to finish my homework because as soon as I reached my room, I would sit behind the table and cry, thinking about how much happier I was back in the days and missing my old home, which held so many memories. Every time I returned home, I tried to get to my room as fast as I could because I couldn't bear my family members seeing me crying. And I tried to avoid shouting or screaming at them because I was extremely irritated. I'm so sorry. This lasted until March. And I remember sending voice messages to my friend and saying that I feel as if I was being burnt alive. Was it burnout? SAD, seasonal affective disorder, or just extreme mood swings? Is it possible that it'll come back next fall? P.S. It only happened in evenings. In the mornings, I was fine. It could be two things. Could be seasonal affective disorder because of the time frame, November to March. But the fact that in mornings you were fine, but our resilience comes down as the days go on, and we end up kind of usually giving into our emotional experience more. And also, if you're at school, you don't always feel safe to cry and stuff like that. So just throwing that out there. I'd want to rule out seasonal affective disorder because that's my hypothesis thus far. The second is that you just moved. You had a huge transition. And there's this thing in the DSM that's called adjustment disorder. And I believe it can last up to a year, 6 months or a year after a big life adjustment. That could be what you're experiencing as well. And so I keep an eye on it. The truth about this is that if you think it might come back, or if we're worried, it's July, right? So we have a few months before November is here, but keep an eye on whether or not you feel yourself going into depression when it gets darker out, when it becomes winter and fall. That will tell us if it's seasonal affective disorder or not. And if you think there's a wait list to see a therapist in your area, I might encourage you to get on it right now, because we want to have someone around potentially if this happens again. Also, in the meantime, just because of the adjustment, that's a big deal. Moving schools, moving places, you feel like you're being burnt alive. I'm so sorry. That is hard. And you should have support as you go through that. So let's reach out and see even if it's online. I think BetterHelp is available in different parts of the world. I don't know if you're in the UK or not, but I'm just saying, like, if you're not in the States, but it's in Canada, the States, I think it's the UK, I think Australia. But that's an option. See what's available in your area for a low cost, or if your school offers something, so we can get you some support as you navigate this transition. Okay? Thank you all so much for listening and watching. Thank you for sharing this podcast. It really, really does help. And thank you for sending in your questions. I hope the answers were helpful. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Do your homework, and I'll see you next time.